the struggles of early-stage MedTech startups.
Hi, my name is Aaron Green. I'm the Managing Director of Iridium Enterprises, and spent 7 years in MedTech working with a company called Nova Signal. I'm now an independent consultant since 2019, where I work primarily with early-stage MedTech companies.
Hey,
Nikhil.
My name is Nikhil Sadhwani. I'm the managing partner at Kaviar Consulting. I'm also a co-founder in a couple of companies. I'm currently the head of clinical applications at Promaxo, and I'm also independently an investor.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Giovanni Lauricella. I am the Vice President MedTech over at the Mullings Group, and that is a boutique talent acquisition firm that's focused globally on building MedTech startup teams.
Okay, so we wanted to start off today in the session talking about the struggles of early stage MedTech startups. And we thought an interesting way to go about the discussion would be to think about a company starting from the early days of its inception and going through the life cycle of the company and talking about the struggles that a company has along the way. So if we think about some of the first things that a MedTech company goes through, in my experience, one of the first steps is formation of the company and how you select your founding team and how you split up the founder's equity. So I'll just give my input here on the first stage and then ask for input from Giovanni and Nikhil. At the early stages when you're founding your company, I think one of the things I run across in my consulting is oftentimes you'll see a company was formed around maybe a couple grad students that are just about ready to graduate from a biomedical program or something similar at a university, and they have a professor on their founding team. When you think about your equity, I think one of the key things to think about is how involved are the team members going to be. So if you're licensing technology out of a university and the principal investigator on the technology is asking for 30% of the company or 50% of the company because they've spent 10 years developing the technology, you have to think about that going forward. That equity is something that you don't get back. And a person that's going to be taking that amount of equity has to have some involvement in the company because that's really where the equity is going towards, is future involvement in the company. I think if I can start with Nikhil, your thoughts on that.
So yeah, in my experience, the companies that I've built with my partners, the first thing that we keep in mind is that everyone gets the right amount of share for the amount of work that they're going to do. There have been a couple companies where we've actually reduced the share of somebody, after a certain amount of time, because every time we set up shares in a company for somebody, what we do is we obviously go with the 4-year plan, and there's a 1-year cliff always. So it's that 1 year where you actually find out whether that person actually really is a asset to the team or not. And there have been instances where we actually have cliffed people. The percentage, I would say, yes, you need to consider how much percent to give somebody, but more importantly, I say, don't focus too much on the percentage in the initial times. You want to get the company from point A to point B, or at least to a point where you can add some value to the company. And if that person does add value to the company, then that percentage does make sense for them. And it also makes sense for you because, initially, obviously, your company is worth 0, right? So you could have 50%, 20%, whatever percentages you want to talk about. but at the end of the day, it has no value until you actually add value. So the first year is really important. And once you find out that the person really does not add any value, whether they're at 50%, you can clip them. So, but someone who takes 50% obviously is not going to be that invaluable to the company. There's a reason why they have that much percent. You see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying. And
yep.
when you talk about the cliff there, so 4-year vesting with the 1-year cliff, are you referring to founders equity, like the common stock, or options, or how do you think about that?
No, it's the founders equity as well. So with everything that we do, we just keep it exactly the same across the board for everybody, whether they're going to come in late or early or whatever it is. Even with options, we sometimes what we do is we do an accelerated plan where based on milestones, or it's a 2-year vestiture. That's how we sometimes do it, but for the most part, it's a 4-year.
Mm-hmm.
And Nikhil, I have a question on that. In terms of, sorry about that. It's an interesting point that you bring up, and I'd be curious, how did those individuals react when you reduce their share percentage after you understand how they are or what asset they are for the company? I'd actually be more interested in the human behavior and their response to that once you've done that. What does that do for them?
For the most part, when people actually get clipped, they're obviously not happy, right? But there's always a discussion beforehand. We just don't call them up and be like, hey, you know what, you didn't do this, so we're clipping it. That's not how it happens. It's a process. Everyone realizes why they're being clipped, or is there a point where we can come to terms that, okay, you know what, you are valuable to us only for that particular part of the process. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce your percentage to this amount, and we'll still keep the 4-year / cliff, but that percentage of yours is going to go down to this much. So we've done that. We've also clipped people, but yes, the human behavior, as you asked, they don't take it really with a smile, obviously, but they understand where they fell short, and we technically we've only done 1 cliff. The others we've reduced the percentage. So reduction of percentage, it happens. It's okay. But in the grand scheme of things, we also tell them, hey, you know what, just imagine if this company is 100 million later, or 200 million, or whatever it is, you still are owning a certain percentage of the company, which will pay off really well. So be happy that you're still here.
I think reading in between the lines there, you're pointing out the importance of active communication along, throughout the growth of the company, but especially with the founding team. Yeah. So next up, going through the product life, or the company life cycle here, if we think about IP licensing, so a lot of MedTech companies are licensing IP from either a strategic partner or a university. And one of the things I like to point out to the folks that I work with is that everything is negotiable. Large organizations tend to have a template that they're working off of, but at the early stages, I think it's super, super important that you negotiate your IP upfront at the beginning, because it's really the start of the company. So how do you think about negotiating on IP, Nikhil?
So we've definitely done that. I'm not really. I wasn't part of that discussion in one of the companies that we've co-founded. It's my other co-founders that did that negotiation. But from what I heard, obviously, the university started off with this big percentage, and they wanted this whole what do you call it, the royalty deal, as you may call it. They wanted for perpetuity, which is fine, but the percentages are something that, and as you said, they work off of a template. They always have this big number in mind, and they're like, oh, you know what, we've done all this work, so obviously we are worth this much. But at the end of the day, it's until you form a company around it, until you form a team that's actually going to commercialize it, it's worth nothing. So you gotta understand it. You gotta explain it to them as well that this is the amount of work that goes in, and this is the amount that, and obviously at the end of the day, everything's negotiable. So you don't just accept it the way it is. Our negotiation actually, if I'm not wrong, it went on for like 3 to 6 months, I believe. So negotiations can go long, but
yeah. And Aaron, I wanted to ask a question to you actually on that one, just especially with your experience on the university versus the strategic partner. If you're going to be negotiating licensing deals or IP rather from either the university or a strategic partner, at least from your experience, who's more predatory during the negotiations of something like that? Which one's more difficult to negotiate against, a university or a strategic partner?
Well, I think that really depends. With the universities, in my experience, my experience is primarily with the University of California system. In my experience, that process can take some time, and it really depends on the workload that the Office of Intellectual Property has at that time, and it ebbs and flows. So you have periods of time where they're really busy working on a bunch of deals, and you have periods of time where they're not so busy. I think MedTech is often seen as the redheaded stepchild in the patent portfolio of a university, where universities recently have seen some big exits in pharma. And so they tend to spend more of their time in the pharma sectors because they have a blueprint that they're working off of. And with MedTech, I think there's a lot of opportunities there to pull out IP that is on favorable terms for the company. So next up, we've got our IP, we've got our founding team. How do you think about selecting the market that you're going into, and how do you think about focus in the early days? Nikhil.
Repeat the question, please.
Yeah, so when, let's say you've got your founding team, you've got your IP, how do you think about focus going into the early stages of product development and the markets that you're going to pursue? One of the things that I find in my consulting practice is that companies will have great IP and lots of ideas, no shortage of ideas. But how do you select the one or two markets that you're going to go after, and what's the importance of focus in the early days?
So what I have seen is, and this is funny, there are a couple of companies that I'm actually advising, and what I've seen in the initial days, I would say the initial months, keeping focus becomes a big problem because you're still in the ideation phase. You have this big idea, you have an IP, and many times, if it's not an issued IP, it's still the provisional IP. You're working around so many ideas that it becomes hard to focus, especially for the founding team. They're super excited, and what my job sometimes is to actually hone it down for them and ask them to focus on maybe one or two things, and that's it. If you don't focus on at least one or two of them, it gives a wrong signal to the investors. They want to see focus. They want to just see this one market that you're going after. They want to see what the response is from that specific market before you go out and venture into other avenues for that specific product line that you're thinking of. I've had issues with a couple of my team members where they're super excited and they keep adding more and more ideas to a certain product that we're building. And I'm like, yeah, that's good. Keep it aside for now. We'll think about it, but let's continue to focus on this specific thing. We have a pitch deck that I don't like to change a lot. You just keep that one specific deck. You can add a little bit more information in there, but always keep it as consistent as you can. When you go out to investors, they want to see progress on that one thing or two things, and only then they're going to take you a little bit seriously. If you keep changing things and if you keep adding more ideas, yes, it's good, but do they see progress on the initial one, right? What have you actually done on the first thing that you mentioned? How is the market reacting? Do you have KOLs on your team from that market that you were talking about, right? So those are the important things that the investors want to see when you actually come up with an idea and the first time you go and project your idea out to the marketplace.
And I also jump in on that one, Aaron, as well. And especially on the focus piece, when you're developing a product, piggybacking off what Nikhil just said about the KOL feedback, if you're generating multiple ideas, how are you getting the proper feedback for the potential end users, whether it's an interventional cardiologist or whatever type of physician or end user, even the patient, if you're going to constantly ideate and iterate, but never really go deep on the one initial idea that you're getting funded for, or that was the one product that was in your slide deck that you sold to the world. So I think if you stay focused on your one piece and actually make sure you get market feedback from the end users, that's a really good way of staying focused, at least on your initial idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that leads nicely into the next topic here, which is the importance of getting feedback from the market. So it's one thing to have a really great technology, a cool technology that's interesting to develop on. Maybe you're making some new breakthroughs. At the end of the day, you need people to buy and use the product. And so how do you, at the early stages of the company, how do you think about reaching out to potential end users, decision makers within either a hospital or a strategic partner, in order to get that valuable feedback to incorporate into your product design? Nikhil.
I would say don't shy, just go out there, talk to as many people as you can. Many a times what happens is if you think, in your mind, it's a great idea, right? And your first reaction is, these are the 10 people, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get them on board and I'm going to get them excited. It's probably going to happen where only one or two get excited about it. The others really don't care, right? So you don't need to focus too much on who, just open it up, reach out to as many people as you can. There's always going to be just a small percentage that's going to be super excited about it. There's going to be a small percentage of people who will actually take you seriously initially, right? So you just project it out, speak to as many KOLs as you can, and hopefully you get really good feedback from people who actually care for that product or in their practice have probably thought of that as a problem, and they're like, okay, you know what? There's somebody working on this, so let me get on board with them. And that's how you find out who is really important for you, and maybe they can become an advisory board member for you, right? And it's always good to have at least 3 or 4 advisory board members in the first few months of your company building, because you need that feedback. You need that constant, bringing you back onto the tracks kind of a thing.
Okay, and we've got 5 minutes left here, so I want to move along to the next points. So one point I wanted to make there is just take copious notes when you're talking to folks out in the field. Anytime you get feedback from potential end users or decision makers, take copious notes and save those things like gold. So you've got a lot of feedback. You're working on product development. At some point, you have to have the money conversation. And so, how do we think about funding in the early stages? And if you can address non-dilutive funding as well as equity funding. We'll start with Nikhil.
So, with funding, what I would generally say is, yes, if you can get non-dilutive funding, great. That also does validate it for a lot of people in the marketplace. Investors like to see that, you know, the NIH funding and all those DoD fundings. If you can crack those, it's great. You know, there are some consulting firms out there that will charge you it's a minimal fee initially. They'll sort of help you shape your grants. So what I would suggest is, yes, do look for grants. Grants are great. There are a lot of government grants that are floating around. And, you know, this could be of any country. There are so many countries, especially now. I know Canada is really, has a lot of money when it comes to grants. There are a couple of companies that I've been talking to in Canada, and they have been getting those grants, and those are not less grants. There's like between 500,000 to a couple of million, right? So that's good money initially for companies to go after, and that's all non-dilutive.
Giovanni, anything to add there?
I would say, to piggyback, I think you said that very well, Nikhil, but I would say on the people side, when you're going to pitch and actually asking for that early stage money, with the little time that we have left, what I would say is keep in mind that later stage companies that have regulatory approval or have a business model or generating revenue already, and may still be privately held. That's why we see a lot of these investors naturally start gravitating towards later stage funding. But because there's a business model that's easily invested in, it's really more of the objective business that investors can say, okay, that's a good ROI right there. In the early stage funding, it really is about investing in the people and the belief of who can be trusted to actually bring this technology forward. So when you have the difference of later stage, which is really an objective business investment, versus the early stage, the management team, the experience and the cachet that they bring to the story of being able to carry this technology forward, because likely the technology that you're pitching for your pre-seed, seed, and maybe even Series A, the technology will likely be different by the time it's commercialized, or at least look different. So early stages, you're really developing, or I should say, investing in the people and having that trust of those people on the management side who are going to lead the team going forward. And I think that's the major difference between early stage funding and later stage funding.
And that's true. The last, I just want to quickly add, anytime you go to an investor, the most important thing for them is the market size. Do you really understand the market? And the second thing is the team. The product comes later because the product's still not there. So they care for the team and the market size more than anything else.
Okay, and I'm hearing that we're running out of time here. I think the one last thing I wanted to talk about is, okay, you've raised some money. Now it's oftentimes the use of funds in the early stages is to grow out the management team. Giovanni, if you can address that, and then we're finished.
Yeah, to make it very simple, when you're building that slide deck and you're asking for that money, there's a difference between a founder who might be an engineer who has no one else or maybe a couple consultants backing them. You really want to be able to get traction enough to be able to bring on, whether it's a part-time CFO who can wear the badge of the company, or a COO or something along those lines. Because when you start to go ask for that money, having at least 2 to 3 strong players who are dedicated to the idea and the technology and the company is really a must-have. And I get that question asked very regularly by early stage startups. How do I build my management team, or how many is enough, or what do I actually need? I don't think there's an absolute magic number, but what you do want is you want a couple to a few strong, experienced professionals that believe in your company and idea to be able to make sure that you could tell that story to investors, to once again have that belief in the management team to move forward. So it's very key. It's very important.
Okay, so that's all the time we have. Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you, Nikhil. This was the struggles of early stage medtech startups.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.